The planet Drossman was not meant for living things. Its gray horizon smothered everything in ash, storms rolled like black smoke during the day, and by night the silence pressed so deep into the bones it felt like the world itself wanted every intruder buried beneath its dust. Kalen Vayer had been on this forsaken world for 3 years, longer than most survived. Once, long ago, he had been a soldier under the Earth colonial banners, fluent in alien tongues, a man who straddled both diplomacy and combat. But the order that shattered his career had been simple: burn a settlement. His commanders claimed insurgents were hiding there. What Kalen had seen were families, children, elders, ordinary folk. He had refused to fire. Refused to slaughter the innocent. The tribunal had branded him a traitor. They had not wasted a bullet. Exile had been swifter than execution. Now Drossman was his cage, and every day was a contest with death. His bunker sat half buried under slag and stone, stitched together with scavenged plating, its vents straining through a purifier that wheezed like an old man's lungs. He kept no mirrors. He didn't need to see the scar carved across his jaw or the gray streak bleeding through his black hair. His reflection was etched into every moment of survival. Each dawn he wrapped his face in cloth, boots sinking into ash as he searched for what little the land offered, scraps left from the dead, meat from the feral beasts that prowled the gullies. Sometimes he returned with a catch. More often, he returned empty-handed. Always he repeated the vow that had kept him alive: you survive. You don't let them win by dying. The bunker had no windows, only a hatch made from welded frames and barred from the inside with beams of iron. Company was neither expected nor wanted. Not until the night they arrived. Kalen had been seated at his workbench, running a whetstone across the edge of his combat knife, while a thin stew of stringy meat and dried roots simmered on the stove. The firewood was stacked, the traps checked, the routine finished. He froze when he heard it. Not the crackle of flame. Not the moan of the wind. Something steadier. Footsteps. Light, careful, more than one. Knife sheathed, rifle in hand, Kalen stepped toward the door, every movement quiet, practiced. He pressed his ear against cold metal. The steps drew closer, crunching softly on ash. Voices murmured, low, alien, not human. He unbarred the top latch and cracked the hatch just enough to peer outside. Shapes stood in the moonlight. 5 of them. Not men, not soldiers, but women. Their skin shimmered faintly in the pale glow, a hue of pink-purple, unlike any species he had seen in uniformed ranks. Their bare feet were blackened by the waists, their tattered cloaks marked with streaks of dried blood and dirt. The garments might once have been ceremonial, stitched with threads of silver, but now they clung by shreds. They were exhausted. One limped, another cradled her arm as though torn from its socket. The youngest swayed where she stood, ready to collapse. The leader, taller than the rest, kept her back straight despite her bruises. Her dark hair was bound by a strip of fiber, and when her gaze locked on Kalen's, her voice carried with command despite the rasp of thirst. "We need fire," she said. "One night. No more." Kalen's rifle stayed low, but his grip tightened. He studied them, cracked lips, shallow breaths, hollow eyes that still burned faintly with alien night vision. These weren't raiders. These weren't scavengers. They were survivors. He remembered the last man he had allowed past his door, a supposed prospector who had drugged him, bound him, stolen half his stores before vanishing into the night. That betrayal had nearly killed him. Trust was death on Drossman. But these 5 were not like that man. They were women with nothing but broken robes and wounds too deep to fake. The leader's gaze did not beg. She did not plead. She stated a fact: without shelter, they would die before dawn. Kalen's jaw tightened. He lowered the rifle, then unbarred the door. One by one, the women entered, and the stale bunker air filled with something strange, the scent of dust-covered skin, faint herbs clinging to their robes, the warmth of other bodies. Kalen dragged the pot from the stove, ladled stew into dented bowls, and set them down without a word. They ate crouched near the fire pit, hunger raw in every swallow. The youngest trembled as she forced down each bite, eyes wide with exhaustion but dry of tears. Another, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, sat closest to the door, as if guarding him in turn. The leader remained near the flames, her robe torn across the chest, scars visible but ignored. Kalen felt no desire stirring at the sight, only anger at whoever had left them in this state. When they finished eating, he brought out blankets and spread them across the floor. They lay down without thanks, without questions. Words were not currency here. Kalen set his rifle across his lap and sat at his post by the slit window, watching the wastes while behind him came the faint sound of shifting cloth and whispered alien syllables. For the first time in years, the bunker was not silent. It sounded like life had returned to a tomb. Kalen did not sleep that night. Not fully. The weight in his chest was not fear but responsibility, heavy, unwelcome, yet immovable. At dawn, he rose stiff from his chair, stoked the fire, and set the kettle on. The leader stirred, hair falling loose over her shoulders, eyes sharp despite fatigue. She rose silently, joined him at the stove, and when he handed her the tin of coffee grounds, she measured them without asking how much. By the time the others woke, the air carried the scent of boiling coffee. Kalen leaned against the wall, arms folded, rifle within reach. He still didn't know their names, nor why they had come. But one thing was certain, Drossman had never given him anything but ash, silence, and enemies. Yet last night, 5 strangers had crossed his threshold, and he had not turned them away. The bunker smelled different now. It was no longer only smoke and boiled meat, but sweat, herbs, and whispers. For the first time in 3 years, Kalen's exile no longer echoed with just his footsteps. Something else stirred. And he wasn't sure he hated it. The women moved about Kalen's bunker as if survival had already written itself into their bones. None of them asked for permission. None of them thanked him. They simply worked. The broad-shouldered one, Phaedra, he would later learn, took a post near the door each morning, scanning the ridge with eyes sharp as any soldier's. The quietest one, Caliph, repaired leaks in the purifier seal with scraps of cloth from his dwindling stores. Neria, her narrow fingers restless, carved faint sigils into the metal walls with the tip of a knife. The youngest, Tova, limped as she carried buckets of ash outside, her small frame trembling but stubborn. And the leader, Salira, moved among them like a flame steadied against the wind, setting order without raising her voice. Kalen did not invite them to do these things. He did not stop them either. He watched. And each task they completed pressed a strange weight against his chest. For years, the bunker had been his tomb, heavy with silence. Now it thrummed with the faint, uneasy rhythm of life. That evening, as the fire burned low, Caliph carried him his torn jacket. She had stitched the seam so neatly it looked stronger than the day the colonial army had issued it. Kalen frowned at the jacket in his lap, tracing the tight thread with a thumb. "You didn't have to," he muttered. Calitha's eyes flicked to his, unreadable, before falling away. "We don't ask," she murmured in halting human tongue. Then she turned and left him with the weight of cloth and words he didn't know how to answer. The next morning, Salira joined him while he split wood beside the bunker's outer wall. She picked up each piece he cut and stacked them neatly, her movements slower than his but no less steady. The scar across her ribs pulled as she bent, but she didn't hide it. "You carry yourself like a soldier," she said quietly. Kalen kept swinging. "Used to be." She nodded once, as if that was all the explanation needed. For a moment their eyes met, hers dark and unflinching, and he found himself gripping the axe harder than he intended. Then she turned back to her task, stacking wood as though it were her duty all along. Days bled into rhythm. Kalen hunted, they cooked. They patched seams in the roof, tightened hinges, scrubbed grit from the purifier until their fingers bled. At night they sat near the stove, speaking in their own tongue, voices quick and sharp like prayer. Slowly, haltingly, words crossed the gap. Phaedra asked him for the human word, knife. Caliph learned, water. Tova whispered, thank you, one night when he wrapped her injured foot. Even Nerea, usually distant, pressed him for the human term, memory, her eyes lingering on the sigils she carved into metal. But Selira spoke most often. Sometimes about the temple they had fled. Sometimes about nothing at all. One night, as the fire snapped low, she told him, they called us priestesses. But not the kind your people think. We were keepers. Guardians of memory. When the temple burned, so did most of our past. Her hand rested on the small satchel tied to her hip. She never opened it, but the way she touched the strap told Kalen it carried more than cloth or relics. He didn't ask what was inside. He already knew it mattered more than food, more than fire, perhaps more than life itself. The first time they fought together was not against raiders, but the land. A storm rolled in from the northern ridge, thick as smoke, rattling the bunker like a drum. Ash poured through every crack, choking the purifier. Kalen hammered plates into place while Phaedra braced the hatch with her shoulders. Caliph stuffed rags into seams, Nerea burned herbs to clear the air, and Selira pressed her hands against Tova's chest, chanting until the girl's coughing eased. When the storm passed, the bunker still stood, not because of Kalen alone, but because they had all held it together. For the first time in years, he realized survival didn't have to mean solitude. That night, as the women curled together in exhaustion, Kalen sat awake by the fire. Selira's voice cut through the quiet. You keep watch even when no danger comes. Habit, Kalen muttered. Or fear. She shifted, eyes reflecting the low coals. I've seen men take what they want, shelter, food, flesh. You don't ask. Kalen's grip tightened on his rifle. I don't take what isn't mine. For the first time, Selira smiled. Not warmth, but something sharper. That makes you dangerous, she whispered. Her gaze lingered before she closed her eyes. Kalen sat for hours, watching her back, and realized the most dangerous thing wasn't fear. It was that he didn't want them to leave. 2 days later, the land reminded him nothing lasted on Drossman. He noticed it first through the slit window. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky a dull gray, yet the birds had gone silent. Too silent. He set down the blade he'd been sharpening and raised his rifle. Selira was already standing when he opened the hatch. Together they stepped into the clearing. The wind dragged low across the dunes. Then Kalen saw it, a glint high above. A drone, small but swift, circling wide arcs. Raider tech. They found us, Selira whispered. Kalen tracked it in his sights, finger tight on the trigger. Too far. He lowered the rifle. They were hunting you before, he said flatly. Now they'll be hunting us all. Selira's gaze did not flinch. Then you should send us away. Kalen looked back toward the bunker, toward Tova limping each time she crossed the floor, toward the satchel Selira clutched as if it carried the last breath of her people. His jaw locked. No, he said. You stay. But if you stay, you fight. Selira tilted her head, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then, with the calm certainty of command, she answered, we've been fighting since the night they came. The drone vanished into cloud, but Kalen knew the truth. For the first time in 3 years, his war had returned. And this time, he would not fight it alone. The first shot came at dawn. Kalen had been awake already, crouched by the window slit, rifle across his knees. The sky was pale, ash-gray, dunes stretching silent. Then the stillness cracked, metal slugs slammed into the outer hatch, sparks spitting from the reinforced frame. He had known they would come. The drone had been proof enough. But knowing and hearing were different things. Behind him, the widows stirred from their blankets. Phaedra was first on her feet, knife in hand, her stance firm as if she'd lived her life in raids. Selira rose slower, her robe slipping loose from one shoulder, eyes steady on Kaelin. "How many?" she asked. Kaelin peered through the slit. Figures moved along the ridge, half a dozen, maybe more, shapes bulking larger as they advanced. Some wore scavenged armor, faces hidden behind cracked filters. Others carried rifles with glowing coils, mercenaries, hired muscle. "Too many," Kaelin muttered. He raised the rifle, sighted the first raider who showed his head, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked the clearing. The man dropped in a spray of blood and dust. "Not enough to stop me," Kaelin said through clenched teeth. The battle slammed into them. Slugs hammered the hatch until it groaned, each impact rattling bolts loose. A grenade flared against the wall, heat searing, but the plating held. Raiders charged, their shouts breaking against the bunker like waves. Kaelin fired again and again, each bullet a heartbeat of violence, each body collapsing into ash. Inside, the widows moved like survival itself. Phaedra braced her shoulder against the door, muscles straining. Caliph dragged buckets of water close, dousing sparks before they spread. Nerea scattered powders from her satchel, strange blends that smoked thick and acrid, turning the air to a choking fog. Tova crouched trembling, clutching a shard of metal like a sword. And Selira was calm in the chaos. Her hand brushed the satchel tied at her hip, her lips moving in words Kaelin couldn't understand. The smoke shifted, curling into shapes, illusions that darted like shadows across the clearing. Raiders shouted, firing at ghosts, stumbling in confusion. "Keep shooting," Selira commanded. Her voice carried steady, fierce. And Kaelin obeyed. Bodies fell. 2 raiders sprawled in the clearing, another staggered blinded into Kaelin's shot. Yet more poured from the ridge, their boots hammering the dunes. The hatch bent inward with a shriek of tortured metal. "It won't hold." Phaedra shouted, her back pressed hard against the door. "Back!" Kaelin barked. She shoved away just as the hatch gave. The door crashed inward, dust billowing. Raiders poured through. The bunker erupted into chaos. Kaelin swung the rifle like a club, buttstock shattering a raider's jaw. He drew his knife, slicing a throat in the same motion. Blood sprayed, hot and bright against stone. Phaedra lunged, driving her blade into another's chest, twisting until he fell. Caliph hurled boiling water across armored faces, shrieks split the air. Tova screamed as a mercenary barreled toward her. Kaelin's heart lurched. He threw himself across the room, slamming his knife deep into the man's side. The brute roared, staggered, and Kaelin finished him with a bullet through the skull. "Stay down," he barked at Tova, who collapsed trembling but alive. The fight blurred. Blood and smoke, screams and steel. Kaelin moved like he had in the old days, precise, brutal, unstoppable. His rifle barked until the chamber clicked empty, then the knife took its place, slicing and stabbing until his arms burned. The widows fought with him. Not soldiers, but survivors. Phaedra's blade swung in ruthless arcs. Caliph turned tools into weapons, hammering nails through wood and driving them into flesh. Nerea's powders blinded and burned, leaving raiders gagging. Even Tova, shaking, swung her jagged shard when one stumbled too close. And Selira was fire itself. Her words bent the smoke, twisted the light, made shadows flicker into phantoms. Raiders struck at illusions, panicked at voices that weren't real. Her eyes glowed faintly, power burning at their depths, every syllable a weapon of will. But the raiders did not break. More pressed in. Their leader appeared, a scarred man with a metal jaw that gleamed in the firelight. He shoved into the clearing, bellowing above the chaos. "Take the women. Leave the man." Kaelin's blood turned to steel. "No," he growled, voice low, dangerous. The clash became frenzy. A mercenary slammed Kalen into the wall, blade raised. He grappled, knife slipping from his grip. Then Selira struck, the weight of her body slamming the brute sideways, her hands clawing at his helmet, her voice cutting through the chaos in a snarl. It was enough. Kalen wrenched free, snatched his knife, and drove it into the mercenary's neck until he collapsed twitching. Selira staggered back, blood streaked across her arm. Kalen grabbed her, steadying her with one hand, knife ready in the other. "You're bleeding," he snapped. "So are you," she shot back, their eyes locking, fierce and unbroken. For one heartbeat, it wasn't war between them. It was something deeper. Then the metal-jawed leader lunged. Kalen shoved Selira aside and met him head-on. They collided like beasts, grappling, snarling. The man's fist cracked across Kalen's jaw, stars bursting in his vision. Kalen countered with his knife, slashing low, but armor deflected the blow. They slammed against the stove, sparks flying. "You should have stayed alone," the raider spat. "Not anymore," Kalen growled. He drove his forehead into the man's face, breaking his nose with a crunch. Blood sprayed. Kalen shoved the knife upward, beneath the metal jaw, driving deep. The raider gurgled, collapsed in a heap of blood and armor. Silence fell. The surviving raiders fled into the dunes, their courage broken. The bunker floor ran slick with blood, bodies sprawled among smoke and shattered steel. Kalen stood heaving, knife dripping red. Around him, the widows gathered, battered, cut, but alive. Tova sobbed quietly in Calitha's arms. Neria coughed through smoke, leaning against the wall. Phaedra wiped her blade clean with grim steadiness. Selira stepped close, her hand pressed to Kalen's arm, her eyes burning into his. "You stood for us," she whispered. Kalen's throat clenched. He had no words, only the weight of her touch and the thunder in his chest. For the first time in years, someone had reached for him, and he did not pull away. That night, after they dragged the bodies outside and braced the hatch again, the bunker was too quiet. The women collapsed together in exhausted sleep. Kalen sat awake by the dying fire, ribs aching, jaw throbbing, knife still in hand. Selira came to him. Kneeling beside him, robe torn, skin streaked with dried blood, her eyes were steady. "You don't have to guard anymore," she said softly. Kalen looked at her, and in her face he saw everything he had tried to bury: need, strength, defiance, and something far more dangerous: trust. Her hands slid to his chest, resting over his heartbeat. "You fought for us," she whispered. "Now let us keep you." Her lips brushed his, fierce and unhesitant. Kalen froze, then let go of the fear that had bound him for years. He kissed her back, hard, hungry, alive. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't fragile. It was fire after cold, hunger after famine. And for the first time in exile, Kalen Vare felt alive. The bunker smelled of blood and smoke for days after the raid. Kalen scrubbed the stone floor until his arms ached, dragging bucket after bucket from the purifier, but the dark stains never fully faded. Outside, shallow graves dotted the dunes where the raiders had been buried beneath the very ash they had spilled blood upon. The widows worked beside him without complaint. Phaedra hauled corpses with grim steadiness. Calith scraped grit from the purifier's vents until her fingers split and bled. Neria burned herbs to mask the stench, scrawling new sigils across the walls. Tova wept quietly each night but rose each morning to fetch water or fold blankets with stubborn hands. And Selira never left Kalen's side. They had survived. But survival wasn't enough. "They'll come again," Kalen said one night, his voice flat as steel. The firelight painted scars across his face. "Raiders don't stop. Not when they lose men. They'll come back with more." Selira's eyes met his across the fire. She didn't flinch. "Then we stop waiting. The others stirred. Neria's carving paused. Phaedra looked up sharply. Kaelin studied Selira, the flames flickering against her violet-pink skin. "We strike first?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice carried quiet certainty. "If we wait, we die. At least this way, we choose how it ends." Kaelin had fought before, under flags, under orders, under commanders who never cared who lived or died. This was different. These women weren't soldiers. They were survivors, widows clinging to memory. Yet in their eyes he saw no fear, only the fire of people who had already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. He nodded slowly. "Then we plan." Days turned to preparation. Kaelin taught them what he knew. How to hold a rifle steady. How to strike fast and vanish. How to turn terrain into armor. Phaedra took to combat with brutal instinct, blade work that cut clean and sure. Caliph built traps from scraps of wire and spikes, clever and cruel. Neria transformed her powders into weapons, blinding dust that seared skin. Even frail Tova learned to wield a slingshot, her hands trembling but determined. Selira trained differently. She carried no blade. No rifle. Her strength was her voice, her will. She honed the strange gift that bent smoke and shadow, whispering syllables that made illusions flicker across walls, phantoms dancing in firelight. Kaelin didn't ask what it was or how it worked. He only knew it gave them an edge no raider would expect. At night, when the others slept, Kaelin and Selira sat by the coals. They spoke in fragments, about her temple, about his army, about choices that had cost them everything. And sometimes, when silence grew heavy, their hands found each other's in the dark. No vows, no promises. Just warmth. Just survival turned into something more. The raider camp lay 2 ridges east, tucked against a canyon wall. Fires burned in rusted drums, laughter crude and harsh echoing through the night. They thought themselves hidden. Safe. They weren't. Kaelin led them through the dark, rifle ready, his breath steady. Selira moved at his side, her robe patched and torn, her eyes lit with quiet fire. Behind them, the other 4 widows walked silent as shadows. They struck at dawn. Phaedra hurled her knife first, the blade sinking into a raider's throat before he could shout. Calitha's trap snapped shut around ankles, dragging men screaming into the dirt. Neria scattered powders that burst into choking clouds, burning eyes and lungs. Tova, small and trembling, loosed stones from her sling that cracked skulls, her fear hardened into defiance. Kaelin moved like a storm. His rifle barked again and again, each shot precise, tearing through men before they could lift weapons. When the magazine emptied, his knife flashed, cutting down anyone left standing. Selira stood at the heart of it all. Her voice rose above the chaos, smoke twisting at her command, shaping into phantoms that darted through the camp. Raiders swung at ghosts, their lines breaking, their courage shattering. By the time the sun climbed high, the camp lay broken. Fires smoldered. Bodies littered the ash. The survivors scattered into the wastes, never looking back. Kaelin, Selira, and the others stood at the center, bloodied, but unbowed. They did not return to the bunker. They stayed. "This is ours now," Selira said, her voice calm as command. The others nodded. Even Tova, clutching Kaelin's coat, whispered, "Ours." Kaelin felt something swell inside his chest. Not survival. Not exile. Home. Weeks passed. The camp transformed. The bunker became a storehouse. Spikes and traps lined the ridge. Fires burned each night. Foragers brought back supplies, hunters ranged outward, guards took shifts. The 5 widows and 1 soldier became something more than survivors. Raiders whispered of the Drosvan keep, of a man who could not be killed, and women with violet-pink skin who turned smoke into ghosts. Fear spread faster than fire. Convoys avoided the ridges. For the first time in years, Kalen felt the weight of exile lift. Not because Earth had forgiven him, but because he no longer cared. One night, long after the fires burned low, Kalen stood on the ridge, staring at stars faint through the ash. Selira joined him silently, her robe brushing his arm. They stood together in stillness, gazes fixed upward. "Do you regret it?" she asked at last, her voice low. "Regret what?" "Letting us in. Fighting for us. Staying." Kalen exhaled slow, heavy. "No. Not once." Selira turned to him then, her scars bare in starlight, her eyes fierce. "Then neither do I." Her hand found his, fingers lacing tight. And there on the ridge, with the endless waste around them, they kissed again. Not fire this time, but steady flame. Warm. Unbreakable. It wasn't desperation. It was belonging. And that's where Kalen's story stands, no longer just an exile, no longer just a soldier, but something more, the anchor for 5 widows who refused to break, and the beginning of a defiance that could turn dust into a home. It's easy to imagine the legend spreading, whispered among raider camps and convoys, a man cast out by his own people, saved not by armies or empires, but by 5 women whose scars shone as bright as their resolve. Their skin marked them as different, their pasts marked them as broken, yet together they forged something stronger than any chain of command. Kalen thought survival was enough. Drossman taught him otherwise. Survival is hollow without purpose, without others who stand beside you when the storms hit. What began with firelight and borrowed blankets became a fortress, a family, and the first fragile hope that the ashes of exile might one day grow into belonging. And maybe that's the heart of this story. Not the battles, not the blood, but the choice to stand together even when the world tells you to stand alone. If you've followed this journey all the way through, thank you for watching. If you want more stories of survival, rebellion, and strange bonds forged in the darkest places, make sure to hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video with a friend who loves sci-fi as much as you do. Your support keeps this channel alive, just like Kalen and Selira kept each other alive on Drossman. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, even in the harshest wastelands, there's always a chance to build something worth protecting.